And while I had these kind of like naive, idealistic beliefs about how we could alleviate poverty and how we could improve the world and just get rid of suffering by using the government, it was once I started to see how often the rhetoric was disconnected from the behavior of the people who espoused these ideas, how often they talked about equality while choosing to discriminate against people for being the wrong race or the wrong sex, so against men, against white people, against the privileged classes, and how often I saw people that would talk about compassion mistreat and pile on anyone that disagreed with them. And so it was that process of realizing there's something that's really disconnected here that got me to leave leftism ultimately and slowly start kind of forging my own belief systems.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 202. I'm talking to Salomé Sibonex. She is an artist living in Miami. She's also very passionate about what's happening in Latin America right now, specifically Cuba and Venezuela. She's an artist, and she's just a very creative person that I've noticed out there on Twitter, so I thought I'd bring her on. How are you, Salomé?
I'm very good. And I actually have officially moved out of Miami. I am officially a DC resident, believe it or not. I'm in the belly of the beast now.
What inspired that move?
Love. I got engaged, and that is the only reason that I am in DC.
Oh, yeah. You're is that Jake Klein or Joe Klein?
Yeah, correct, Jake.
Yeah. Does he work for a think tank or something, or?
No, I think he's doing independent work right now. He's gone in and back and forth between different think tanks, though.
Well, yes, and you'll also have to get used to the warmer weather or the colder weather. So, yeah, that's.
Oh, with relief. With relief.
Yeah, so you do artwork. How'd you become a libertarian, first of all?
Yes, great question. So I was a woke leftist back before it was the cool thing to do. And of course, as an artist, that's kind of the crowd you end up falling into. The arts tend to lean left, and so you end up feeling very much like a pariah, and it's not good for your career if you are openly not a leftist in the arts, and that's still true today. And so when I was younger, it also just felt like we were at the height of cancel culture before it was even having a name yet. And so I was seeing this happen where people would get piled on and insulted. And I realized that it seemed like the only way for me to avoid that was to ingratiate myself with these people. And while I had these kind of like naive, idealistic beliefs about how we could alleviate poverty and how we could improve the world and just get rid of suffering by using the government, it was once I started to see how often the rhetoric was disconnected from the behavior of the people who espoused these ideas, how often they talked about equality while choosing to discriminate against people for being the wrong race or the wrong sex, so against men, against white people, against the privileged classes, and how often I saw people that would talk about compassion mistreat and pile on anyone that disagreed with them. And so it was that process of realizing there's something that's really disconnected here that got me to leave leftism ultimately and slowly start kind of forging my own belief systems, which started mainly with the central tenet of freedom. I just wanted to feel free. I wanted to be free to think and speak for myself. I didn't want to have to kowtow to any party lines. And so that was ultimately what started to lead me in the direction of finding people who had previously written about freedom, like Hayek, like Eric Fromm, and these thinkers who, they're not all libertarian. Fromm is not a libertarian, but they conceived of freedom as an internal state first. And that's something then later is expressed through how people take action in the world, the systems that they create, the economy, and how economic freedom is actually one of the most fundamental freedoms an individual can have. It's the freedom to create your own life. And so once I started to connect this idea of freedom as kind of like an abstract concept with the concrete reality of how we live, it was just love at first sight. And so then I started to work with the Foundation for Economic Education, and that's when I became much more well educated in libertarian philosophy. And I've just been going deeper and deeper ever since, because it's a really rewarding thing when you've been looking for answers and finally you find them. And going from a background as a leftist where I thought things like, oh, well, why don't we just raise the minimum wage and then there won't be poverty? Once I started to find out the answers to this that made sense, that I could actually logically grab onto and say, yeah, this is sound, this is whole, I kept looking more and more. And it was just like the most logical, principled political philosophy that I've ever encountered. And so I still enjoy it to this day. It's something that I find very useful for understanding the world.
You know, here in Austin, I know a lot of actors, and you know, on the local level, it's not. I don't think it's as bad as it is in Hollywood, but it's still about
Right.
two-thirds. But what do you think it is that's attracting, actors, artists, people who do this creative work? What attracts them to socialism? I'm still trying to figure this one out.
Oh, yeah, great question. I am still trying to figure it out as well, as I've realized a lot of people in the arts have received their latest marching orders to suddenly feign excitement over Kamala, even though for years no one said anything about her being a great politician. Suddenly I'm watching musicians and actors and influencers in that space, in that kind of like artistic space, turn heel and decide that actually she's been a great candidate all along. We just didn't say anything. And so I think there's a degree of groupthink that it seems like it wouldn't be the case, that a sphere where creativity and individuality and boundary pushing are valued would be the same sphere that would suffer from groupthink. But the problem is that those values have actually receded while the groupthink has gotten stronger. And so there's different stages of like an arts culture in a society. And we don't have, as many people will observe, we don't have the same kind of like truly individualistic, boundary pushing arts culture that we once did prior to the 90s. It's gotten more and more entwined with this cultural ethos of safetyism and care and signaling one's care. And my theory is that this is largely being facilitated by new media, being social media. So before that, there was a lot more of an individualist ethos in the art that we created because it was more of an individualistic medium. You made a movie with the people you made it with, and then you put it out, and that was it. You wrote, and you put it out, and it was published, and that was it. But now we have this more collectivist media sphere, whereby you put videos out and you get instant feedback. You publish something, you get instant feedback. A movie premieres, instant feedback from the collective online. So this is way different from the kind of like more gatekeeping arts world where you could have opinions, but they weren't this kind of like hive mind where people were instantly reacting and then together reacting to each other. This, to me, is one of the central problems in our culture at large, is this collectivist ethos by which it's more about signaling that you're on the right side of things, that you have the right opinions, than it is about actually expressing articulate and interesting opinions. And so as we've gone into this media sphere where we're looking at people so much more. We're judging them so much more. We're talking about them so much more. The online sphere is like a high school cafeteria. Everybody's there, everybody's looking at each other, everybody's judging each other, and most importantly, everybody's trying to look better than the other person behind them. And so the arts have also succumbed to this very kind of like collectivist, immature ethos whereby it's no longer more important to do just good work. It's also important to be seen as a good person. And different parts of the art world definitely suffer from this more than others. I think the acting world is particularly prone to having personalities that really care about how they're perceived. It's just kind of like something about that personality that is attracted to the fame and the ability to portray oneself in different ways that means those kind of people tend to think a lot about how they're perceived and enjoy being perceived well. And so this happens in different regards throughout other mediums in the arts, whereby people are much more aware now of what team they're on, whether they look like a good person. It's so much more just pure optics driven than it's ever been. And so you have this kind of environment now where people are more concerned with showing what the good beliefs are and showing that they're on the right side than taking a stand for something that's truly meaningful and principled, actually challenging the boundaries of things, and putting the good work that they're setting out to do first above all. And of course, the cancel culture phenomenon adds to this because now there very much is this palpable pressure where if you don't have that super secure base and you get the attention of the wrong group, it can affect your career. You may be familiar with a filmmaker, Meg Smaker, who went through this with her film that was, I believe, first at the time called Jihad Rehab, and I believe it's called now The Unredacted. And the film is a pretty normal, great film. Highly recommend you watch it if you can. But she was having the film go to Sundance. It was going to win awards. And then suddenly a group of disgruntled other filmmakers came after her and said, you shouldn't be telling this story about people in the Middle East because you're not Middle Eastern and you're appropriating their story and this is going to do harm and da-da-da. Never mind that it actually was a very compassionate story that helped to show the unfair treatment that some people in the Middle East were receiving. The whole point was just, you don't get to tell that story. It's offensive for you to do that. And thus we're going to come after you and the institutions that platform you. And so ultimately, I believe she was not able to show the film at the film festivals that she ultimately was going to show them at, like Sundance. And I'm sorry, not Sundance. It's South by Southwest that it was pulled from. And it might have also been Sundance. Sundance was involved. I don't remember all the details. But point being, that's still a very real phenomenon now by which a group of people can pressure institutions to say, don't show that film, it's going to do harm. And so you have this situation now where, like never before, artists feel that their career depends on whether they are not offending people. And that is exactly the opposite of the kind of climate you want for good art.
Yeah, it was at Sundance. Yeah, that's yeah, it's getting to this point where you, and I think art is always going. I mean, how can you possibly know how people are going to react? But it seems as though the feelings of other people have become, and there's this whole, this whole victim culture that I've been victimized because
Right.
my feelings have been hurt, and it's all part of what's going on with the left. Yeah, but it seems like artists are really effectively shooting themselves in the foot and really destroying.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, do you think it's partially? I've heard the statistic that 3% of actors make a living. I suppose it's not much different from artists. Do you think that's part of it here? That, I mean, because so few people in this business do make a living, that they're more likely to be this way? Would it be better if everybody? I mean, if say half of them were making a living, would that make a difference, or is?
That's a great question. I definitely do think there is a degree to which career climbing plays a role in this. Now, the question to me is whether there would ever be a satisfactory level at which someone would decide, it's no longer worth it to me to go after competitors in the arts and try to cancel them or badmouth them because I've got enough. Many people would like to make that argument, but the reality is that status climbing and career climbing are somewhat innate to the human experience. We are chronically unsatisfied. People always want more. That's just the human condition. It's what led us to build civilizations, because we didn't build a very nice hut and say, you know what, this is enough. I've got enough. We keep desiring more, and that's a great thing because that allows us to create more things, to alleviate our problems through these solutions. But at the same time, it can take these destructive forms that you often see play out in socialist systems and in the kind of collectivist ethos where people don't believe in individual merit. They believe more that the way you get ahead is by playing power games. And so you see that with cancel culture very much so. People tend to go after those who have achieved something, those who are in their same realm of career. In the case of Meg Smaker's film, once I read into the cancellation of that film, I couldn't believe how bald-faced the status climbing was. It was not a bunch of moviegoers that were offended by her film and wanted it pulled from festivals. It was other filmmakers who were competing in the same arena who decided that this film is offensive and thus it should not be shown. And if you look at the list of demands that they sent to, I believe it was Sundance, that they demanded take down the film and also provide for these other terms that they wanted to negotiate for. One of the terms was do business with our leftist charity program that ensures equitable pay for employees on film sets or whatever. So literally in their terms of negotiation for getting this film taken down was a payout for them. So I very much believe that these kind of cancel culture and the sanitizing of art is driven by jealousy, by insecurity, by a desire for status, and by a desire to cut down competition, not by being good, not by competing better, but by simply getting rid of the competition and saying this person shouldn't be allowed to compete because they're offensive. And so you could say that, like, oh, if they got paid more, that would be different. But the reality is the status games are still played at the height of the arts. The most wealthy and successful people in the arts are still playing those status games. They're still, maybe they're not doing cancel culture per se because they're not from that time or generation that bothers with that, and they don't need to do it that way. But they're still playing those games behind the scenes where they're trying to get a deal that's best for them, get their competition iced out of the negotiations and things like that. So paying artists more wouldn't necessarily alleviate this kind of like collectivist mindset that has started to grow in the arts. But I do think the lack of success that many artists face leads them to believe that collectivism is the solution and that the system of capitalism is the reason their widget art is not selling. And it's not actually because perhaps you need to make better art.
Well, I think there's only so many people who are going to consume the art too. I mean, it's just the same. We can only read so many books.
Exactly.
We can only listen to so many songs. I mean, it's just we do have a limited time resource there, but so I do wonder if that's just the fact that there's always going to be more content than what there's a demand for. But
yeah,
I do wonder also if maybe there's. It's but I was listening to one guru I like, and I think this actually comes back from Kaczynski, but that modern leftism has become a coping mechanism to deal with the soullessness of modern society. I don't know what if you need me to elaborate. I'm wondering what if you think about that. And maybe that's why these people are all dealing with the soullessness of modern society, that we're just so disconnected.
Mm.
We're over socialized, but we really don't have probably don't have friends like we used to and things like that. I mean, do you think maybe that's the issue here?
Yeah, that's such a fascinating point. Kaczynski had some points, and
Yeah.
that is one of them. Now, coping mechanism is the key word here, right? Because there are many things that are coping mechanisms that don't actually help us, don't solve the problem. They just allow us to blunt the discomfort of the problem. So, blame is itself a coping mechanism. And you see this a lot on the left. It's these people's fault, it's this system's fault, it's everything except my fault, because that personal responsibility of saying, okay, yeah, maybe the deck is stacked against me, but at the end of the day, what's more efficacious? Is it for me to try to rework the entirety of society, or should I do what I can actually control in my life right now? This is exactly what I dealt with when I was younger and was attracted to leftism. I felt that same kind of disorientation and confusion about how to get what I wanted from life. It seemed like life was unfair, and that no matter what I did, it would always persist in being unfair. So it's not my fault. Something outside me has to change. And of course, that sets you up for a very unsatisfying life, because you're forever trying to change things that you don't actually have full control over, unlike the control you have over yourself. And so that that is something that I do think a lot about, how much happier people might be if they were just potato peelers in like a feudal village. There's something about the way our society actually allows for us to dream so big and to see success all around us and to feel like we could do something to get that, if only such and such. Unlike in these kind of like feudal village pasts where there was no sense that, oh, if only I got my big break, I could be the king. If only I work hard on my resume and do this thing and da da da, I could go become some land owning merchant or whatever. That didn't exist for most of human history. You were born into your lot, and that was it. And so, in some regard, I think that we actually struggle to adapt to abundance, because, of course, humans are adapted to lack of abundance. We're adapted to be able to deal
Yeah.
with a harsh environment where I'm constantly seeking food, I'm constantly seeking shelter, I'm constantly seeking safety. So now that we have all these things, and we actually have the mechanisms by which you can become more wealthy, you can become more successful, you can get your 15 minutes of fame, I think it makes people a little crazy. And so we are kind of like more and more set up to be dissatisfied, despite the fact that we have so much more than most humans ever did. But that's our responsibility, right? So that's the difference that sets me apart from someone that might still look at leftism as a coping mechanism, or they wouldn't see it that way, but as a way to resolve for the dissatisfaction of modern life. The reality is that we already have a lot of abundance around us. What is up to you is how you're going to set your life up, which means how you're going to look at life, how you're going to actually live, and the mindset you have. That's in our control. And I think that's what is the next step, is how do we manage this like abundant society we have, where there is this sense of like, you could get more, you can always get more, while also reminding ourselves that you don't have to always get more if it's going to make you miserable.
True. And I don't think we ever see that how modern civilization and capitalism has liberated the artist in so many ways.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, can you imagine if doing those, like Mozart or Bach, and being able to record their music, and instead of having to play it, or drawing that picture, and being able to make 100 million copies of it to give away to people.
Yes.
It's really it's liberated the. I mean, there was a time basically where you had to, if you were an artist or a composer, you had to have a patron.
Right.
You might go to work for the king, or go to work for the lord or something like that, and he would just keep you on to keep things beautiful. And it certainly was. It wasn't the best lifestyle. Really, it brought art out to the masses.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a great point. And I think that's something that artists today really overlook. And it's unfortunate because I often say that there's never been a better time to be an artist. You have much more control over your career as an artist now. You have far more freedom as opposed to that past where it was like, hope you get that one spot as the king's favorite artist. And now, of course, you have to do whatever the king wants, whatever your patron wants. You're not going to say like, oh, I'm going through an experimental phase. Like, just deal with it. No, that we'll find someone that makes what they want. And you had only that limited audience because wealth was so limited. Most people were not in a position to purchase art. Now, art has become a mass market product. People want to watch movies, they watch shows, they collect art at home, they listen to music, they read. All of these things have made it so that, like never before, you actually can find an audience for your art without having to go to some middleman. You can go to the audience. It's an
Yeah.
amazing thing.
Yeah. Do you think also maybe the decline of Christianity and religion has impacted this? I mean, even if you're not religious, I can't deny. I mean, Christianity has inspired some absolutely amazing artwork, amazing statues, beautiful music at Christmas time. I mean, do you think that makes a difference? Maybe artists were happier when they were, creating and singing for the Lord, whereas now they're not. I suppose most of them, if there are any religious artists, they probably don't even admit it, do they?
Not in the mainstream. If you get branded as a religious artist, that's kind of its own subculture
Yeah,
then, and so you're less likely to get that kind of like mainstream appeal. Now, I have complicated thoughts on that because on the one hand, I think that art is about transcendence largely. The best art reminds us about the best in humanity, which is our ability to transcend limitations and obstacles and ourselves, the ability to evolve. That is one of the key aspects of what it is to be a human. It's that we're not stagnant. We're always able to make a different decision because we're not slaves to our instincts. And so that is a central tenet in a lot of religion, is just this idea of the transcendent. And so you don't just see that in Christian art. There's a lot of Islamic art that's just phenomenal. It's amazing. Now, I'm no fan of Islam at all. And so I don't necessarily think that the religion itself is what begets great art. Rather, it's what religion has for a long time provided access to, which was that transcendent principle. And so you see an interesting thing in art, at least in American art throughout history. There are these different periods which are just awesome all in their own way. In like the 60s, you have this psychedelia, this movement of art that embraces a kind of like psychedelic perspective, and it's an incredibly unique period of art, and it provided some of our greatest artists today. I mean, you have like the Beatles, Pink Floyd, and like the Who, and all of these artists. They were part of that movement at some time, and so was it religious art per se? No. But did it touch into that transcendent principle, that sense of we can get to something bigger than ourselves? That's what art is always at its best doing. Even when you're in a concert, that sense of I'm part of something that's bigger than me, which of course religion is like famous for providing. Art can do that. even in that kind of secular way, because I think that experience actually transcends any one particular religion. It's a human experience, whether we're seeking it through dancing around a fire in our tribe or going to church. And so what I see as the problem in art that comes later on is that it starts to be more removed from that pursuit, which is interesting. It starts to become an academic field. And so it starts to be something that people want to study. They want to write criticism about it. And it merges with, of course, the perfect ideology to write endlessly about anything without ever having to cite sources or prove facts, which is postmodern theory. And so postmodernism delves together with art, the arts, to create this kind of monstrosity by which anything is anything if you call it the thing. And so that is really the kiss of death for art. And I think art is only just slightly beginning to recover from that, because it's almost like going through this teenager phase where it's shock for the sake of shock. It's apathy for the sake of showing apathy to your audience. You have these kind of pieces like the banana taped to the wall, which really is something that echoes Duchamp's earlier art pieces like the urinal, which, sure, when Duchamp did it, it was one of the first times an artist had notably challenged the idea of what could be art. Fun. That's a great intellectual exercise. Do you want to put it in your house? Does the urinal make you feel connected to the wider human population? No. But that's because it's more involved with that kind of like intellectual academic realm. And so now we have this period of art that has gone on for so long where artists don't feel obligated or even called, worse, in my opinion, called to seek the transcendent. It's this kind of like really neurotic, narcissistic view of art that it's entirely about whatever I want it to be. There are no limits. There are no standards. Whatever I call art becomes art. Anything that you don't apply any type of standards to will degrade. And that's exactly what has happened to art. And so you're probably familiar with Rand's philosophy of objectivism, which I think is a wonderful lens that can rescue art from the pits of this kind of like postmodern nothingness perspective, which is there is a reality. Things aren't just whatever you call them. They are what they are despite what you call them oftentimes. And so that kind of perspective really is what helps art to shine, because it's something that recognizes that it's more than just about what you're making. It's also about how that links into the human tradition. And of course, that's really one of the most core pursuits of art is if it's going to be good, it's going to be something that connects us to our wider humanity. Not something that just like, oh, that's so funny, it's a banana taped to a wall. Or like, oh, that's a funny little cartoon or whatever it is. Or, oh, that has the right political message in it. None of that actually connects us to that kind of transcendent principle that reminds us what it is to be human, what we value most, what we're capable of and should pursue. Those are more just kind of these like intellectual masturbation pieces that don't actually do the best that art can do.
Well, Rand, was an advocate of romanticism and thought that art should portray things not as they are, but as they could be. It's so you don't, you might, make draw a picture of somebody running a mile in 3 minutes. Obviously nobody's ever run a mile in 3 minutes, but it's something that maybe somebody will do someday. And I do wonder if, because art has lost that romanticism, that maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know if Rand could bring that back. It's also telling as well that Rand is not very well liked by, literature experts, so to speak.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of the problem too. I mean, are people in art and other fields, are they more trying to please the experts as opposed to the audience? It's like it's like you make a movie and maybe it doesn't do that well at the box office, but all the critics say that it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see that there's often like shows that have the Rotten Tomatoes phenomenon where it's the audience loves it, but the critics hate it. And you know which one you want to see. If the critics loved it, but the audience hated it, it's probably not as enjoyable and as timeless of a movie as the one that the audience enjoyed but the critics hated. Because of course, like these critics, even though I like doing art criticism, I think there's a great role for art criticism. And Rand did art criticism herself in one of her books, in the Romantic Manifesto. She does criticize art. But when you do it from this postmodern perspective that doesn't actually tether to the real world at all, because you simply say, if I see it in the piece, then it's there, and I don't need to explain it any further, that doesn't help us to clarify our understanding of the world. That doesn't help us to actually navigate the world. The best thing, like you described, Rand has this romantic ethos that art should show us the best, which is a very interesting argument, and I might disagree in some regards. Like, she didn't like horror or these kind of genres at all because she thought they were not showing humans at their triumphant best. And well, I do like some horror films, so I think there's room for disagreeing with her. But I think what is not something you can disagree with very well is the idea that art is at its best when it does show us our best values, the best of humanity concretized in art. There's so many times where I feel down about the world and I just see things, notice after notice, headline after headline, that things are not going well. And you feel down and you feel hopeless. And I've remembered that that's exactly the times when you turn to art to remind you about what humans are capable of, what good we can do, what good we should do, and what you're actually pursuing when you don't give in to that kind of nihilism and cynicism. There's something about art that can reconnect us to the best that humanity has to offer, and that's when it's doing its best. And so I do think that there's a problem with how artists make art oftentimes. Rand would argue also that, and I believe that's true, the art an artist makes is very much a reflection of their own internal worldview, their own principles, their own belief system. And so if you have an artist with a warped belief system, it comes out in the art. And so more than ever, we have artists with warped belief systems who care more about signaling that they're on the right team or forcing the correct messages into their art simply because they think that's what people want to see. But that's not actually what the best art does. It doesn't make what people think they want to see. It makes what's true. It makes what is actually connected to reality and uplifts from that. And so that really, like, it comes down in many ways to the fact that we've lost touch with reality. Like, I really think that there's something about that good times create weak men create bad times kind of phenomenon, by which when life gets so comfortable, where we can often go years and years, lifetimes, without facing the consequences of our bad ideas, like believing in socialism and advocating for this, and never actually being forced to deal with the reality that that creates, we're untethered from reality. And when you're untethered from reality, how can you inspire people to act in the world? How can you create something that feels true and timeless if you're not connected to reality?
Yeah, this is all true, and I do think, one of the more interesting parts of art that's still been somewhat romantic is comic books, because at least in America especially, comic books are always dominated by the superhero, who
Yeah.
fights evil, and there's good versus evil. And I mean, I think that's one place, where where a lot of art has just become very moral relativistic. I mean,
Mm.
what would you say about things like comic books? And but I'm hearing comic books are even going down the woke path too.
Interesting. I'm not a comic book reader, but I think that's fascinating because that would make sense that those are some of the most primal archetypal human stories is good triumphing over evil and the agency that the individual has to triumph, to overcome the obstacles in their world and do good for their world because of it. And so I think there's even something in that about like movies have had the same phenomenon by which there's like so many superhero movies to the point that people are now like, okay, can we make something new? Like, not every movie has to be a superhero movie. But the thing is, so often the other movies that get made have this kind of like leftist pandering, like, oh look, we're so aware of our privilege, and like they'll just throw in this kind of insufferable messaging and this like victimhood ethos that is not enjoyable to watch in a movie, particularly when people want from movies that moment of being uplifted, of looking away from the failures and the ugliness of our everyday world and coming to a movie where it's like, yes, that's inspiring, that's moving, that's exciting. And so hero stories are the like core storytelling device to provide people with that. And if we lose the hero stories, I don't know where we go from there, if they
Yeah.
start going woke, because at that point you really are in a moral relativism situation by which you say, and you see this, right? You see this with a lot of the like the confusion in some hero movies and things like that, where it's like, oh, the villain is not actually the villain, and like the villain is a lot more sympathetic than you realize. And while there's truth to that, when it's done in this way where it's moral relativism, that's like the hero and the villain aren't really that different after all, it's like, if the villain came after your family, I think you would connect to reality really quick and realize there is a big difference between good and evil. But again, that's that lack of tethering to reality where we can play with lies and say, oh, what if actually the villain is the hero after all? What if it's good to do bad? And while that's very fun in the kind of like Duchamp, like, what if a urinal was a piece of art? It's a novelty for the moment. The reality is that I think we believe deep down, like we have this innate connection to the real world, unless we are so far gone that we've like suppressed that to instead fit in with the ideology du jour. And so when the stories around us don't actually resonate with our intrinsic sense of what is real, I think it only serves to further alienate people and make people feel that there's something wrong in their culture because everywhere they look, they're being told up is down.
Yeah, I do think that sometimes the whole action movie thing is really geared partially toward China because
Mm.
there's not a lot of work that goes into translating these movies. I mean, if you have a 15-minute sword fight, there's nothing that has to be
Right.
translated. It works in every language. But I also one character that comes to mind though, as far as the whole thing about being, not he ends up being starts out as the protagonist, and he always is, but Walter White from Breaking Bad. I mean, there's
Mm.
a guy who just goes, they kind of make him out to be the hero, but he goes off and just becomes a cold blooded killer.
Right, right.
And I kind of scratch my head about that. You know, uh, Although there still are, I think one of the better heroines recently, well, not that recent, but is Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great example. I think, if I recall, it's been a while since I've seen either that movie or that show, so it's hard for me to analyze it well. But I do remember watching The Hunger Games very well because it really falls along that classic hero story by which you have someone that's kind of like in this underdog position, but through their abilities, through their actual individual capability, they're able to survive and to help others. And that's really just like the intrinsic human story that every individual wants. It's the kind of things that you can imagine past tribal groups gathering around and telling the story of historic battles, and it
Yes.
providing that same sense of we are part of something great. We have within us the ability to control our destinies for the better. That's something that every human being needs. Psychologically, when you have that lack of agency, when you have that sense that the things that I do don't actually change my destiny and don't actually make a difference in the world, that is quite literally the confluence of symptoms that create a depressive state. It's not healthy for human beings to not be able to partake in that sense that they're part of something good and that their actions can impact the world for good. And these stories are exactly how we often do that. So it's really a shame when you have these kind of like anti-hero stories, or just like stories that are more about posturing the correct political beliefs than they are about
Yeah.
dignifying the human in the story. And because we rob people of that chance to get a sense of agency, to have a sense of dignity.
Yeah, it does make that, and sometimes I think you get those stories where maybe the hero has flaws but kind of grows and redeems himself.
Right.
Uh, you know, uh, but I do think there are stories that you walk out and think, boy, I really believe this is possible, and you may not have believed it was possible. I mean, one of my all time favorite movies is Wes Anderson's Moonrise Kingdom,
Oh, nice. Yeah, he's great.
and it's just the whole feeling of this movie forces you to believe in love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, isn't that so great? There's something so just wholesome and simple about our stories, because they connect us to what's very universal for us. All humans experience that desire for love, and that again connects us to like our humanity, as opposed to kind of this like alienated sense of like I'm an isolated individual, I'm not part of some like great human story or existence. And Wes Anderson, that's it's a beautiful example of how a good movie can be both an escape and a reconnection to what we value most, like an escape from the world that tells us love is never enough. We have to go to war. We have to be in conflict with each other. Conflict is inevitable, and you have to be the domineering person or you're going to be dominated. And then you go to this fanciful realm where it's like, what if we didn't do that? What if love worked? And it really does feel like you get to feel what that belief in action is. And I am very much of the belief more and more that we start with our emotions. And then very often we just rationalize the intellectual explanation for those emotions after the fact. And so a film is such a great, or music, these kind of mediums is such a great way for us to work with the emotion and actually see what does it feel like if I believe that love is a force for good in the world. This feels good. What does it feel like when I believe that the hero and the villain are no different and my destiny is out of my hands? That feels depressing. Don't like that world. And so it very much is kind of like this microcosm by which art gives us this playground to feel what we want to feel and then act out the steps needed to maintain that feeling, as opposed to just kind of like rationalizing whatever we want to feel and then building a worldview after that. I think that consciousness about like how do the things that are good in life make you feel, and how often do you actually feel those things? Art is a great way to kind of like reconnect to those things and remind yourself, oh wait, no, I don't want to be in a constant state of hate and fear and antagonism and prejudice. I want to feel love. I want to feel hope. I want to feel heroism. And art reminds you, like, yeah, this feels better.
Yeah, and I think one of those, it's and it really does seem like so much of postmodernism really just is a tearing down of the heroes,
Yes.
trying to give the hero a flaw, trying to seeing how that hero is not perfect. I don't know where that comes from, but it seems to be a very it's almost like they don't, it's I do sometimes think with the way media has been exposed, they're almost trying to take every hero away from us if we do have a hero. It's
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like I've even seen that outside of the artistic realm. You've seen it in kind of like the real world. I remember when the media came after Joe Rogan so hard for a while when he was not falling in line with whatever the latest COVID narrative was. And it was like they wanted to dig this person's life up and show you he's no hero. He's no one to look up to. He's a fraud. He's someone that's an anti hero. And that's a pattern that plays out with anyone that you think is showing you that, oh, actually, there's a better way to go through life here. This person is doing their own thing, and that's exciting. The left, it's usually the left, really, but any collectivist group will do this if they feel that that individual is threatening to their control over the population. They'll go over and say, like, actually, this person is not who you think they are. They're a fraud. They're a danger. But it has been the left for so long that has done this, whereby any kind of like hero figure, you have this with the arts, like any artist that doesn't go along with like, oh, we all love Kamala Harris right now. What are you talking about? We've always loved her, even though we've never spoken about her. Anyone that doesn't go along with the group think, they demonize them. They try to cancel them. They try to paint them as like some secret racist, some secret malicious person. And so it's like that very simple story of the individual that goes off on their own path, that has the courage to pursue their own beliefs and their own lifestyle despite the group not approving. That is no longer a story that we value or even recognize in our culture. It seems like the collectivist ethos has become so deeply ingrained that individualism itself, that differing from the group, is instantly described as some kind of threat, some kind of malicious deviation.
Yeah, and I don't know how it encourages good art, because you end up with art, that just reminds me, how often do movie critics ever really disagree on a movie? It's just so weird. They're almost always unanimity. I mean,
That's funny, yeah.
you never hear a movie critic, for example, go out on a limb and say, I think this movie that won the Oscars is crap,
Right.
or go the other way. It just, and sometimes our heroes, don't even have to be anything, really a superhero. I think of somebody like, Corey Comparator. I mean, who, got shot in the,
Right.
up in Butler County, Pennsylvania, a bullet that was intended for Trump. It's just, you have, and sometimes I think those are the hero because you realize, okay, well, this guy's a hero. He did something heroic, but he's still fairly ordinary. But
Right.
it says, well, maybe you can go out and do this too.
Right, right. Yeah, that was a particularly interesting case because I remember there was pretty quickly after that news came out, some people started searching for his offensive tweets and bad posts on the internet. And that seems to really play into this ethos that there are no heroes, because everybody has a skeleton in their closet, whether it's an actual skeleton or just, oh, we happen to disagree with this opinion, so we're going to pretend this person is bad now. But there is this ethos whereby the ability to look people up and find all of their opinions, and like the day they had a bad day and they were like, oh, I hate drivers that drive like this. They should just disappear from the road. And it's like, look at this thing he said 5 years ago. This is no hero. And that ethos is exactly the mindset of a weak person that does not want to believe in heroism, because there is such a lack of empathy and of, again, reality. The fact that you would be so delusional about what that moment is by which someone dives in front of their family to protect them from bullets and dies in the course of that, to write that off because they had some opinions you didn't like at some point in their life is genuinely a kind of delusion, like an actual disconnection from reality, whereby words online matter more than actions, life-saving actions. And so again, it's this kind of like there are no heroes because that would require perfection and nobody's perfect. But if you look at the best hero stories in art, it's exactly the fact that they aren't perfect, that they have obstacles, that they have failed, that often makes the hero the most endearing, because that's real. That's the actual human condition, is to overcome one's limitations and in the end have had your life contribute to something greater than what your limitations took you away from.
Yes, you do have that. You have that hero who has flaws, but still overcomes those flaws, and it's the realization. Maybe it's somebody like like Doctor House, or somebody like or like John McClane in the Die Hard movies. I mean,
Right.
he's got flaws too, but he still managed to do some things. And granted, some of these things are kind of far fetched. I mean, it is often crazy. So the bad guy always misses, but the good guy never misses. I mean, why? I mean,
Yeah.
realistic.
Right.
You just kind of wonder if it's and I've talked to I've talked to paramedics. He said the one thing that's unrealistic about those shows about paramedics is that you have a lot more death.
Yeah, that makes sense. But again, that goes into that Randian
Hmm.
ethos that do we want to focus on the death around us,
Yeah.
or do we want to celebrate the times when the good guy wins? And that was one of the more interesting parts of her book, The Romantic Manifesto, that I read, was her conception of how art should be not realistic. Art actually should be intentionally unrealistic when it comes to highlighting the best of humanity. And you think about it, and it's like, yeah, you don't really want to watch a movie where, like, the hero is waiting in line at the bank because, oh, I have to go pull money out before I go on this heroic journey. Like, even though that is real, like, you have to pack and do your little errands and stuff as you get ready for your hero's journey. And so we already kind of understand that we are looking at something that is synthesized down to like the best.
Yeah.
And that ethos of like, no, but it should be realistic. Like, it should show that there's poverty all the time, and it should show that the hero is like not a perfect person in every way, to the point that there is no hero. That kind of thing is just like the way she described it, and I agree. It's this reminder that there's no glory to strive for. Everything is mundane, and that's where reality lies, is in the like the lowest common denominator. And I think that is very often an excuse for people who want to shirk their responsibility to be better. If we turn around and just say, everybody's kind of not that good, there are no heroes, everybody's kind of like, just a regular person and has villainous tendencies, why strive for greatness when greatness isn't real? It's like, okay, yeah, that's a really convenient cop out if you wanted to not strive to be your best. But of course, what kind of society do you have then? And when you look at these cultures like ancient Greece and like the Romans that would celebrate the best of humanity, these were cultures that we still look back at for their wisdom and for their mastery so long ago.
Yeah, it's very much it's and like I said we assume that Clint Eastwood cleans his gun, but we never see him clean his gun. You know,
Right.
but if he's a responsible gun owner, he's going to do that. Now.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, and you never see them stop and put gas in the car, do all those other
Right.
boring things we
Exactly.
just assume that they have to do. It's well, we never did get on to the other topics, but I think this is probably a good place to wrap up since you said you only had an hour. So it's actually been really great having you on here. This was very enlightening. I thought you'd be a good guest, and you had a great voice. So yeah,
Thank you. I had so much fun. I'd love to do a part two. We can get to the other topics
Like,
in another episode.
yeah, maybe we will get to another topic. Yeah, I'll have to get some incentives, get some things done. It's been very interesting. Well, where can we find you out? Do you have anything else you want to say before we go? What was your favorite part of this?
Oh gosh. I think I love remembering why movies are good and why I like to watch movies that reconnect me to the feelings and the ideals that I want to strive to have in my everyday life, because it's so often that we're consuming more and more just like news and nonfiction things that are kind of like about how culture is going downstream and it's not good and everything is bad. And so I feel in some ways never more has art been a respite that gives us that inspiration to strive for good. So I can always use a reminder for that.
Maybe something will grow out of this. Yeah. So you're at Salome Siboney.
Salome Sibonex at
Siboney, yes,
X,
Siboney. Yeah.
on Instagram,
Yeah.
on Twitter/X. Also, you can find me at wetheblacksheep.com on Substack. That's where I write about individualism and overcoming groupthink and building healthier communities that don't depend on collectivism to do things properly.
Well, that should be interesting. Of course, right now you're in the belly of the beast, and
That's right. Getting a firsthand view of what collectivism can do to us.
it's actually more expensive too than Miami, which is another thing. It's hard to find a
Yeah.
place that's more expensive than Miami nowadays.
I know, I know. I went from Miami, then I lived in LA, and now I'm in DC. It seems that I really just like to waste my money.
Oh, you're getting around. Well, I hope it all works out. I hope it
Thank
you know,
you.
get your artwork done and with your marriage and kids and all that
Thank
nice stuff.
you.
So yeah, so
I hope
uh,
so too.
please like my like the video, subscribe to the channel, say some nice things about it. Go buy my novel Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. Thank you, Salome. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.